of you have the guts to play for blood?
I'm your huckleberry. That's just my game.
Ladies and gentlemen, Derek Lambert, the host of Myth Vision Podcast, joined today by Dr. M. David Litwa. How are you, Dr. Litwa?
Good. Thank you, Derek. Good to be here. Good to be back. I hope all is well.
All is well. Thank you for coming and introducing a new book that you have, which I got to share. Everybody needs to see this. The Gospel of Thomas, right? The Gnostic Thomas. An introduction to the Gospel of Thomas. Link is in the description, and you can check it out in the pinned comment down below. Get you a copy of the book. It beats Amazon by $8, $9, almost $10. And you're helping me out here at Myth Vision by doing so. So get this book. I'm telling you, this is where it's at. If there's a book that'll take a skeptic and have them reconsider, this is the one, ladies and gentlemen. And I tell you, I'm always on a journey of truth seeking. And so, I'm always interested in wanting to see, do I have it figured out? Do I not have it figured out? And, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. So that's perfectly fine to have this Socratic kind of view. Also, he has a course. If you don't sign up for the course, you're missing out on the gnosis, ladies and gentlemen. The Gnostic Thomas, if you will, the Gospel of Thomas. He's going to cover this book in depth. Tell us a little bit about this as we venture into tantalizing our audience with your course, the book, and this book, the Gospel of Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. Yeah, so I'm totally with those who are skeptics. Believe me, when it comes to the traditional Gospels, there's been ferocious criticism of those Gospels, and it's true. They do contradict each other, and some people have been abused by the Bible, not so much by the Bible, but by the users of the Bible, and they have discovered another Jesus outside the Bible who is actually more true for them. And for many, that Jesus is the Gospel of Thomas. When I was in Durham, before I went to seminary, I had a routine health appointment, and just randomly, I was talking with the nurse, and she was asking me what I studied, and I said I study early Christianity. And she just randomly said, for me, the Gospel of Thomas, that's the only true gospel. It's the only Jesus that I could believe in, because the Jesus of the Synoptics and the Jesus of John just seems like an egotistical a-hole. And the Jesus of the Synoptics is so full of contradictions, and we don't need another fiery-eyed, wild-brained, prophet, apocalyptic prophet. All we have to do is just turn on the news to get our heavy dose of apocalypticism. We don't need Jesus to be this fiery-eyed nutcase. So the Gospel of Thomas presents a Jesus who basically says, I'm not your Lord. I'm not your master. He's not even our teacher, but he gives these secret sayings of wisdom, which teach people to live on a different plane of existence, not just a rational plane, but a supra-rational plane, or maybe we could call it a kind of increased depth of living. Jesus is wanting us all to be like that very special disciple, Thomas. Thomas is Jesus's spiritual twin. Some say that he's his physical twin, but as we see in the gospel, it's really, the emphasis is really on the spiritual part, that Jesus is inviting Thomas to be his spiritual twin. And that invitation is actually for all readers of Thomas to become Jesus's spiritual twin. He refuses to be, egotistical. He's not saying things like, I'm the way, I'm the door, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I'm the only way. That's just not Thomas. The Jesus of Thomas says, you're the way, inside you is the way, and I'm going to awaken you so that you understand how to get out of all the self-constructed prisons, socially constructed prisons that you are in.
If I may, Dr. Litwa, what is wrong with that message? That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, this is like, there's so much tribalism, right, in ideologies and people who hold to certain views. Like, I don't know, every skeptic watching now, come on, let's be honest. There's some good stuff we can gain from this, right? Like, if you don't bring that which is within you forward or forth, I'm not getting the quote correct, but like, then that which is within you will destroy you. But if you bring that which is within you forward, forth, it will save you. That which is within you. It's almost like positive thinking, even though I know it's more depth than that. It's like every man who thinks he can and every man who thinks he can are both usually right. And it's wisdom. It's like deep wisdom of thinking in that way. So it's a way that I can think of Jesus and go, I can believe that, because it's kind of like it's you. It's like, I don't need to say it's the Jewish guy rabbi over here who's saying this is what you must think and the end is coming soon and you're going to hell. All that stuff we've taught with the baggage of Christianity that we've typically been fed. To me, it's like, it's a mirror of myself, and that I can love, that I can, but you're not, you want to better yourself, of course. You want to always improve upon that. But it's something that I think, however you want to boil it down mechanically, I can believe in that, if that makes sense.
Right. So Nietzsche said that there were 3 stages in spiritual evolution. In the first stage, you're a camel. That's sort of like your fundamentalist evangelical Christian who isn't raised in a tradition to be deep thinking, who's in fact anti-intellectual. And at that stage, people just load on your back a bunch of dogmas and beliefs, and you carry that around like a camel, and you nod your head and you move through the desert. The next stage is where you become a lion, where the camel transforms into a lion with this really sharp teeth, just tearing apart all the baggage that was loaded upon them. And this is obviously the skeptical or atheistic stage, where you're just criticizing, tearing to shreds by historical critical methods, everything that the Bible and a lot of church history has to offer. Right. And, there's a big industry on YouTube doing that. But the third stage, Nietzsche said, was the stage of the child, where the child learns to wonder at things again and reimagines some of the things that are in the tradition and understands them in a much deeper sense. Doesn't identify with the tradition anymore, but identifies with a deeper spiritual meaning. And that's the Gnostic stage. That is the stage of Thomas. And that's why I call it the Gnostic gospel. There's a lot of resistance in scholarship to saying that Thomas is a Gnostic gospel, because for many scholars, Gnostic is like a bad word, right? Yeah. So if you say something is Gnostic, then you mean that it's heretical, right? But that's not what that word means. That's how that word has been poisoned by the heresiologists. And we have the ability to redefine, as I say, cleanse the category of gnosis so that it means something impactful today. Gnosis is about simply attaining salvation through spiritual knowledge, through deep knowing. It has nothing necessarily to do with arrogance. It doesn't make you think like you know it all. In fact, it makes you think that you know almost nothing. But what you do know is that you're on a journey. Right. And the journey set out for you in Thomas is a way of salvation that you interpret the sacred sayings. And by means of the interpretation, you experience disturbance. And out of that strong disturbance, you begin to, as it says, rule, and then finally to rest. And this is similar, again, to those stages of initiation that we've had. So I'm not the scholar trying to say to you, oh, well, the reason you should read Thomas is because it's so much like the Synoptics. You know, Mark Goodacre, for instance, along with Simon Gathercole, wrote great books in 2012 saying that, you know, Thomas, at least in some sayings, is definitely dependent on the Synoptics. And you know why evangelicals love that? Is because then they say, okay, well, I don't need to read Thomas anymore because that's not real Jesus. But of course, the whole presupposition of Gnosticism is that history isn't your window into truth. It doesn't matter how early something is. Like, I can sit down today and write a gospel and publish it online. That can be as true as anything you find in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. It might be more true, right?
Mm-hmm.
Truth is outside of time. It doesn't matter when something was written. It matters whether it's true. And there's a philosophical presupposition that's basically Christian. It's evangelical, but atheists too assume it unknowingly. And that's that truth comes through history, right?
Right.
That historical investigation gives you access to truth. And what is
Did
older,
it happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did it happen? And you know, did it happen at a certain time and in a certain place? And that, frankly, for the Gnostic, is irrelevant. And unless one is ready to bite down on that hard truth, that's sort of like, you know, the pill that you need to swallow. That's irrelevant, right, to truth. When you're ready to bite down on that pill, then you're ready to read the Gnostic Thomas.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I love that because I feel like I feel like I'm in this lion/child phase where I think I'm always going to have a bit of Lucian kind of, you know, in me, where I want to be critical of the superstitions and the things that are around. But at the end of the day, I think there's a moment where I'm like, hold on. How can I use this? Because you hit a wall. Okay, so this is all there is, huh? You know? Why don't you make the best of it if that's the case? For me, is, you know, these are, you can see my kind of my philosophical outlook here. Like, I want to say, why wouldn't we want to use things that help better and improve and enrich someone's life if they can, without them having the literalistic history truth perspective, but rather I get truth out of watching Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, you know, you name it. If it's a fiction and it's good, it's teaching me something deep about myself, about the world, about morals, ethics, that you name it. So, to the Gospel of Thomas, if I can bring up a few examples from this book, and then maybe ask you a few questions of your own about this text. You're the professor teaching. This gospel seems to have the same idea that the Hymenaeus and Philetus. I don't know the exact doctrine of resurrection, but the perspective by Hymenaeus and Philetus was that the resurrection had already happened, and anyone with like a little bit of common sense would go, dude, go look at the graveyard. Like, what do you mean the resurrection already happened? Like, the graves are not open, the dead has not risen. How can someone believe the resurrection already happened? And I can't remember the exact saying, but I think it's 50 something or 112 or 13 or something off the top of my head. It's, when is the repose of the dead going to happen, Lord? And he says, it's already happened. Look around you. You can't see it, but it's already happened. What is going on with this idea of really realized spiritualization? I think John echoes this too, where when the resurrection happens, Lord, we know with Lazarus' death, and he's like, I am the resurrection, which is like at least somewhat toward this Gnostic Thomas perspective. What's going on, Dr. Litwa?
Yeah, well, as far as I'm concerned, John is a Gnostic gospel as well. It's Gnostic in a different way. But what I would say in Thomas is I would caution against people reading the repose of the dead as the resurrection of the dead. I'd be very cautious about that. In fact, what's interesting about Thomas is it never uses the word resurrection. I would say that in Thomas, the resurrection is basically irrelevant. And why do I say that? Because it's not that it's realized or unrealized. It's that it's irrelevant, because resurrection has to do with bodies. But the presupposition of Thomas is that the body and in the world itself is just a corpse. It's dead matter. or it's living matter that lives for time, breathes for time mysteriously, but then just stops living, and just decays away. And so the presupposition of Thomas is that's not you, right? So that's the first bitter truth you must accept. That entity, this stuff here, the face that you see in the mirror, the hair that you comb, the color eye that you have, color skin that you have, teeth that you have. I don't have great teeth, ears, everything. That's not you. So you can take a chill pill, first of all, about how you look. Even your gender is not you. Like, that doesn't get down to the fundamental root of you. Thomas is Platonic, meaning that the important part of you, the real you, the true self, is something different. It's a spiritual entity. It's a non-bodily entity. And so those who are talking about the resurrection, they're talking about bodies and worrying about bodies and arguing till they're blue in the face whether I'm going to have twisted teeth in heaven or whether I'm going to have, genitals, even though I won't be using them, of course. All those questions in terms of the Gospel of Thomas, those are silly questions meant for spiritual infants. The Gospel of Thomas says that stuff is irrelevant. You are already at rest, right? That's repose. You can claim the rest. You're not claiming resurrection. You're claiming rest. So that's the difference from John.
Okay.
There is no resurrection. There's nothing to be raised because you are already supremely alive. You are supremely alive. You may not know it, right? And those people who are telling you, like, I will say, getting to your earlier point, that it is liberating for people to become skeptical and to start deconstructing the truths of fundamentalist Christianity. That's liberating. Don't get me wrong. But in the end, if the counter message to that is just that we live in a world of dead matter, we ourselves are made of matter, we mysteriously breathe for a time, and then if we get hit by a bus or if we just grow old and die, we return to dead matter, and that's it. And there's nothing else, and there's one life to live. Is that good news? Is that true? Not from the perspective of the Gospel of Thomas, right? Like, you don't need to accept something depressing. If you want to reject the fundamentalist gospel, please do. Yeah, that's not helpful. But then your alternative is not something depressing, like, oh my God, we're just in this,
there's no meaning,
void of dead matter, right? And that we will all die off. The sun will eventually burn up its fuel. We're all going to die off, even if we don't nuke ourselves. So in a billion years or so, we're all going to be gone. There's not going to be a single memory left, right? So all this is meaningless, right? So that is not something that you need to accept, right? If you accept the gospel, the good news of Thomas, is that you're not dead matter. You're not dead matter. You are supremely alive because whatever you are is not made of atoms. And that's, that takes a leap of faith too, but that's also a message of liberation.
I could see why that has. Pretend with me for just a second that isn't literally true. Let's just pretend for the sake, because there's no way to falsify whether or not it is or isn't. What makes more positivity in light of this? You're not asking for apocalypse in a way. You're not saying, there isn't this message of don't do something to better the world to help enjoy this moment you have, I imagine. But it's almost like, even if it isn't true, where I'm at in my head, Dr. Litwa, is that even if it isn't true, why take away someone's toys? Why take away someone's joy and their hope and these kind of ideas? And so why wouldn't you almost want that to be true, even if it isn't necessarily, or you can't know that it isn't? Does that make sense where I'm coming from? Like, if you hit that wall you mentioned earlier, that it's all matter, it's all decaying, it's all going to end one day. Now what? I mean, if that's the case, we evolved on this planet to survive, and all the experts in the world tell us that's what it boils down to. So why wouldn't we take advantage of some philosophies that help us make this traumatic, hard experience of existence a little better give us a little hope and aspiration to imagine something beyond, something better. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. What are your thoughts?
Well, right. That's philosophy as a coping mechanism. That's existentialism, basically. That's like Jean-Paul Sartre. That's people like Albert Camus. They use philosophy as a coping mechanism in light of that scientific materialism, which says that this is all going to end. It was a fine party while it lasted, but eventually the light is going to go out. And yeah, of course, there's many options that you could have. You could become a hedonist and a materialist, but it all depends on your experience, right? And the Gnostic experience says there is some part of you that says deep down, maybe in a state of meditation, maybe through an experience with, life or death experience, maybe just something you saw in the night sky, or maybe something you read in a religious text. But there's some internal voice that says there is something deeper. This world, what you're seeing is just the outer face, the outer husk. And there is something so much deeper and a deeper truth. And some people have experienced this deeper truth taking psychedelics. Some people have experienced this truth in deep states of meditation. Some people have experienced this truth just at random. They were walking down the street and they got hit, Dale Allison says that as a kid, he had an experience where he was sitting on his back porch and he saw the stars coming at him as if like they were spaceships, like moving toward him. And he had this basically a mystical vision, mystical experience. So the Gnostic experience is something like that. It's the experience of something deeper. We don't necessarily call it God, right? And Jesus refuses to call it God. That's one of the interesting things in the Gospel of Thomas. It doesn't mention God as the positive force in the world. It always mentions Father. And, that's interesting. The only time that the word God is mentioned is when it's in the voice of someone else. That's in saying 100. And it's, distinguishing the Father from God. So you're like, oh, okay, that's weird. But is it? Because those who have had the deep experience of reality don't necessarily call it God, right? In fact, God would be very, very limiting and would put that deep experience of reality within the confines of a Judeo-Christian tradition. But you don't need to do that, right? Many people have many different experiences.
Right.
Some see Jesus in visions, some see the Virgin Mary. I'm not denying that they would see that, but other people see stuff that they never even imagined, aliens and weird demonic beings that they never even heard of, stuff that they can't explain, stuff that's not even in any tradition. That's the experience that people have. That's the Gnostic experience. So if you've had this experience, you know that there's a deeper reality, and that's what you then base your philosophy on, right? On that deep experience. And then you build upward. After you've had the experience, you can't go back to the fundamentalist church that says, please come in, leave your brain at the door, and we'll get started. You can't go back there, but you also can't go off the other deep end into scientific materialism,
right,
and just like hedonism, let me go, I don't know, try to win the lottery or something, or buy a nice car and then kill myself. Like you don't want to go there. So you go on the route of, I'm going to try to figure out what this mystery is. And that's what this book is about. It's the Gnostic Thomas, where Jesus, who isn't the Jesus, the familiar Jesus you knew, the wild-eyed, apocalyptic weirdo and the egocentric, egotistical SOB of the Gospel of John. He's the Jesus who says to Thomas in saying 13, you know what? I'm not your master and you don't know who I am. And Thomas says, I don't know who you are. I didn't even have words to tell you who you are. And Jesus tells him three things, and That's it. We don't know what the three things are, but he tells them some kind of mystery, and then it's done. So that's the Jesus that you never knew. You know, I think that's a book by like Philip Yancey, like The Jesus You Never Knew. Like that's the Jesus of Thomas. That's not the Jesus of the traditional gospels. That's this Jesus, Thomas.
Do you get into any of the interesting data that might point to its early existence, such as, to give you an example from Elaine Pagels, who I love so much. She's so sweet, and she's put some deep thought into this book like you, and has like cherished this book for a long time. She says that the fact that the Gospel of John takes so much time to work against Thomas seems to be a red flag internally to her, that this gospel has to have existed, like most likely. I mean, not has to, but very probable that this gospel exists at least contemporary, if not before, the Gospel of John in its writings, in light of the fact that it takes 3 occasions in the Gospel of John to kind of make Thomas not look good. But then also the spot at the end where Jesus, makes an example out of Thomas, and then he blows his Holy Spirit, breathes his Holy Spirit. And the text goes out of its way twice in that chapter to say Thomas was not in this room. Like Thomas did not get the Holy Spirit. And it's like, what? So I don't know if you get into some of that stuff in your course. I imagine you do, but do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah. So I'll just run down the table of contents, which is also the order of the lectures. So after introducing Thomas, I talk about, is Thomas Gnostic? There, you've got it there.
Yep.
Thomas and Jesus, Thomasine ethics, Thomas on women, Thomas and the synoptics, Thomas and John, and then Thomasine deification, which is becoming Jesus's spiritual twin. And I agree that there's some kind of dialogue between Thomas and John. I don't think, though, that we need necessarily to think of like written products.
Okay.
I think the spiritual tradition of Thomas preexisted the book. And so I put the writing of both Thomas and John in Alexandria. So I think that they were dialogue partners. Whoever's writing these texts are in dialogue even before these texts are written down. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like, the author of Thomas mails and goes to the post office and mails and says, "Okay, John, here's my gospel. What do you think of it?" And the other guy's like, "Well, I think you're an a-hole, so I'm just going to say a bunch of bad things about it and then publish it anonymously." Like that kind of is a bit simplistic. I think there's a definite exchange of spiritual ideas and traditions, and there's definitely disagreement. But I would say that's because of the common spiritual culture in Egypt. Egypt is really the spiritual birthplace of Christian Gnosticism. And it's why this November I'm trying to get people to sign up to go with me to Egypt on a tour called the Gnostic Egypt, Alexandria and beyond. And so I just want to let your viewers know about that. You can go to Egypt with me. I've written a book on Alexandria, published with Cambridge. Obviously, I've now written on Thomas. And if you have interest in the other Egyptian spiritual tradition, the Hermetica, which also I think influences Thomas and John, this is the trip for you. So let me know. I mean, I'm trying to. Spots are limited. I'm trying to get people to sign up for that. But because that spiritual tradition of Gnostic Christianity comes from Alexandria, and because John and Thomas both emerged from Alexandria, I think absolutely they are talking to each other. And we can't say who comes first because, we're not talking necessarily about texts. We're talking about a simultaneous dialogue and back and forth. But you better believe that I think there's also statements in the Gospel of Thomas that I think are speaking directly to John and are trying to refute John.
Really?
So, yeah. and it's very clear that they disagree on some fundamental issues. Like the Gospel of Thomas never refers to Jesus as the Logos, and it strongly opposes John's vision of salvation as only through Jesus. Thomas says that the vision that salvation is only through the self, and anyone can ascend to God, not just Jesus. So there is a huge amount of dialogue here.
Okay, my final question, because I would love to do round 2 with you and discuss these matters. And of course, as we get closer to you wanting to put the tour together, let's link back up in case someone else is watching and decides they want to go to Egypt and check it out. I'm planning on doing tours too, especially when the war calms down in some areas, but even Greece and stuff at some point. But like, you're going to Egypt, and if they want to go somewhere with somebody who's diving into this stuff, they really should go. My last question to you pertaining to the Gospel of Thomas, what would you say is one of the most profound sayings in that gospel personally for you?
Yeah, so the most powerful statement, I think, well, there's 2 of them. Well, I would say 3 that are all connected. So Thomas 77 has Jesus identify himself with the light above them all. But in Thomas 24, he says there's light within every person of light. And in Thomas 108, which I've written a whole journal article about, Jesus has, the one who drinks from my mouth will become as I am, and I will become that person. And I think, what we see here is this fundamental idea that there's still something special about Jesus, but it's because he is a manifestation of that divine light. And that divine light is not, something like specific. You can't locate it in a tradition. The divine light appears, I think, in visions of all kinds. It doesn't matter whether you were born in India or Greece or Pakistan or Australia. I mean, people see the divine light. So Jesus is important because he's the light above them all. But the light exists within every individual person. And the journey then is to drink from the bubbling spring that Jesus has tended. That is to realize the light within, and then become more and more like the light above them all. And I'm not just talking about the movement of electrons here. This is about a spiritual divine light, our true substance, which is not subject to science. And I know that people will resist that and fight against that, and say like, oh goodness, if it's not subject to science, then we can't test it. And if we can't test it, then we don't know if it's true.
Right.
But again, it all goes back to your spiritual experience. It's your spiritual experience. You go out in the wilderness somewhere, some untouched forest, look at the Milky Way, tell me that you don't feel something more than the push and pull of dead matter. Or you fall in love with someone and they fall in love with you. Tell me that there's not something more than the push and pull of dead matter, right?
Right.
Your spiritual experiences, and there's all kinds of them. That's what's going to lead you to this book, to this course. And I'm not some kind of spiritual master or guru. I'm a historian, I'm an academic, but I believe that this material can help people. And I really do want to help people who are trying to not necessarily get back to their tradition, but realize the deeper meaning of some of the things that have been robbed from them.
Yeah.
Because evangelical and fundamentalist Christianity, it's not the true Christianity, and it has done wrong because it has robbed people and sort of made them think that Gnostic is a bad word, and so to avoid it. But when they actually read the text, and I don't know what Elaine Pagels would say, whether this is Gnostic or not, but I think it is Gnostic. And what I mean by that is it speaks of a spiritual message that can save you, and you are saved not through the blood of a dying God dripping off the cross. That's a silly, silly mythological idea. You know, you don't have to believe that. You don't have to believe that magic. That's not the only option, right? There's also spiritual twinship.
I just want to make one comment and then any final word from you. I have a few friends of mine who identify themselves as atheists. They don't think there's actually a God, right? But they do practice Eastern meditation, Eastern forms of Buddhist traditions and different things. And they say that they felt mystical experiences as people who don't think there may be some like guy in the sky or whatever you want to imagine God to be. And I like the way that you worded that. There is no atonement salvation necessary. There is no condemnation of eternal conscious torment. There is no mythological construct that we've been harmed by because of these systems that they have also been, they're passing the trauma on through mythological fear and other things, you know, that they've inherited. And this is a perfect way to break the cycle, but also to find something for yourself. If you've caught yourself thinking like I have, you know, okay, if it is all just material matter and we evolve, it's mindless and it's random and it just, now what? You kind of catch yourself going, now what? You've picked things apart. You're so skeptical. You don't have a belief. You believe in yourself, though. I've always believed in myself. That's the funny thing. Maybe that's because I've held it together because of that. And maybe the salvation was true, that it was in me the whole time and that I had what it took. So there's something deep about, I think, having a tradition, having something that we can look forward to and not just hitting the world with that kind of philosophy that I think can lead a lot of people to go, what's the point? Because when something bad does happen, and it will, all the engines break down eventually. Everything eventually does wear down. What do you have to lean on? You know, what is there? What is there something that helps us, you know, find meaning, purpose, value? And so that's what I'm looking for in these ancient myths and stories, even the ugly stuff. You know, I'm learning from it all and gaining insight because the world is beautiful and ugly. There's both here. And I think the Gnostics saw that as well in creation and said, well, why are animals doing this to other animals? Why are people dying? You know, they saw these and asked the fundamental questions we all ask, and they just had their own answer for how they would explain that and escaping it and all. So anyway, final words from you, Dr. Litwa. Anything that you want to comment about what I said, or as we promote, I'm going to share the screen and show people as we wrap things up.
Yeah, well, it sounds to me like you are ready to take a spiritual deep dive into the Gospel of Thomas. And I hope many of your audience are as well, that they've been primed into this. And I'll give you a secret that if you get the ebook first, you can get $10 off the course. So if you scroll down there, Derek, there's a that right there. You can add to your cart the course for $39.95, which is $10 cheaper than if you buy the course outright.
Oh, I see.
So you'll get a deal there if you buy the book before you buy the course, and then get them bundled. But yeah, if you're ready for this, if you're ready for the Jesus you never knew, if you're ready to rethink these old, tired synoptic sayings, if you're ready to rethink the Johannine gospel, if you're ready for a new sayings, secret sayings, and if you're ready to embrace gnosis, this is your opportunity. Take it. The universe will only come knocking on your door, every so often. So don't let this slide.
Don't let it slide. Check it out. For me, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a skeptic. I'm critical. Okay. I'm extremely critical, but I'm at a point where I'm like, hey, there should be no limits. There should be no prison that I set myself into. I should be allowed to check and explore and experience and see what can I find in these things. Yeah, I limit myself on miracle stuff and things like that. But I've had some profound experiences in my life before, and they are life-changing, and they can help you on a better path. And so for me, most of all, I think that's worth investigating further. And I hope people will sign up for the course, check out the book. Dr. Litwa, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here. I feel like I'm always constantly going through different experiences. And we've been on this journey together on YouTube for 3 years now, I think. And I really appreciate your time, man.
Sure. And I hope there's someone in your audience who will join the tour with me. I know there's someone out there who wants to find out these, who wants to delve into these spiritual mysteries in Egypt itself, which is, I think, where this was written, and where the Gospel of Thomas was written. So reach out to me. I've got the website, mdavidlitwa.com, the YouTube channel. So don't be a stranger. And I want to thank Derek for the opportunity to tell the world about this course. It's got an amazing audience and a huge family, and I hope everyone will take advantage.
Hope they do too. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, never forget, we are Myth Vision.